Okay, class, in this lab, I'm going to go through and show you how to set up multiple domains within a forest. So I have my 4 original machines booted up, DC1, NAT1, NAT2, DC3, and I've also booted up DC2, DC4, DC5, and I'm going to boot up DC6 while we're talking. So here's my network map, and DC2 is going to be part of the existing domain that I've already created, my root domain. And DC4 will be part of that domain as well. So I'm going to set those 2 machines up. Then after that, we'll set up uh, another child domain and another tree domain, and I'll explain those. So first thing I'm going to do is go to DC2. My IP address should be 172.16.0.3/21. I'm on DC1 right now. I just want to show you my IP settings. While I'm waiting for that to come up, I'm going to sign into DC2. I'm going to go back to DC1 and see if it's loaded yet. So you can see for DC1, my IP is 172.16.0.2. My subnet mask is 255.255.248.0. The gateway is 172.16.0. So I'm going to point DC2 to DC1 for name resolution because DC1 already knows about the contoso.com domain. I'm going to do this in PowerShell because it's a lot easier. New net IP address. The IP address is 172.16.0.3 and the prefix is 21 and the default gateway is 172.16.0.1 and my interface alias is Ethernet. Guys, I didn't press enter here. This is just word wrap. So there's no space after this dash. It's dash, then I, no space. I'm going to hit yes to relax my firewall. Set DNS client server addresses. Server addresses is 172.16.0.2. That's DC1. And my interface alias, I'm hitting tab twice, is Ethernet. Basically, I did dash I, tab, then tab again. Ethernet. I'm going to rename the computer. The new name is DC2. And I'm going to restart. Okay, it's rebooted, so I'm going to sign back in. I'm going to install Active Directory, AD domain services. I hit IN tab. That's the wrong thing, so I'm going to hit tab again. And I'm going to restart. So for my parent domain, I'm going to have 4 domain controllers: DC1, DC2, DC3, and DC4. For my next child domain, I'll have 1 domain controller, DC5. And then for my tree domain, I'll have DC6, just 1. In real life, I would probably have multiple domain controllers per domain. So if one goes down, I have a backup. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is encrypt my password, because the following command will not accept an unencrypted password. Convert to secure string. The password I want to convert is capital PA11WRD. It's currently plain text, and I want to force it. So I'm going to encrypt this password and save it in this variable. Now I'm going to install AD domain controller. I don't want to create a new domain yet. I just want to create a new domain controller. And the domain name is contoso.com. My password is PWD. So I put in the switch, I put a space, then $ PWD. And then I'm going to put my credentials, which will be get credentials contoso /administrator. And then I want to do a force. It's going to prompt me for my password and promote this to a domain controller. The yellow is just warnings. If it was red, that would be a problem. While this promotes, I'm going to pause the video. Okay, my DC has rebooted. I'm just signing in. Okay, I'm signed in. So I'm going to go to Sites and Services. I can see that this DC2 automatically got added to the west site, which is appropriate for that subnet. I can still see that East only has one DC. DC3 is the bridgehead server, and DC1 is a bridgehead server. If I go into DNS, I can see I copied the Contoso DNS zone from DC1. I have an entry for my machine. I also have my reverse that I copy from DC1. It's here as well. I copy my forwarders. Since DC2 and DC1 have the same information, if the DNS server on DC2 doesn't have any information, there's no reason to send it to DC1 because DC1 has the same information. So in this case, it's going to forward it directly to the outside DNS servers. If I go into Contoso and I expand sites and I go to West TCP, I can see I have two global catalog servers, two Kerberos servers, two LDAP servers, DC1, DC2. So if someone queries this site for a domain controller, they'll be given two options, 1 and 2. But if they query the east site, they'll only be given one option as of right now, DC3. So I'm going to go to DC4 and do the same thing. I'm going to sign in. I'm going to pause the video while it's signing in because it takes a minute. Okay, my DC is logged in. I'm going to open up PowerShell. No, actually, I don't want to use that one. I'm just going to change my font so it's easier to see. I'm going to look at the diagram. The IP address for this machine should be 172.16.8.3. And I'm going to point this DC to this DC for DNS. I don't want to send this one across the WAN link because that's going to cost me money. So I'm just pointing this DC client, the DNS client here to the DNS client, server on this machine. This DNS client will point to this DNS server. And it's going to be 8.3. So new net IP address. It takes a minute. The first command you run. IP is 172.16.8.3. The prefix is /21. The default gateway is 172.16.8.1. I'm going to go back to the diagram. This 8.1 is my gateway. This is the router out of my network. And the interface alias, again, I did not put a space after that dash. I did -in tab. And I'm going to say Ethernet. Open up my firewall. Set DNS client server. I'm hitting tab complete. -s 172.16.8.2. I'm going to send that to DC3, all DNS traffic, and the interface alias. That's the wrong one, so I'm hitting tab again, is Ethernet. Basically, if I had multiple cards, it's asking me which card am I changing. I'm changing the card that's called Ethernet. Rename hyphen computer. The new name is DC4 and restart. Okay, so I'm going to sign in. I'm going to open up PowerShell. And I'm going to install the software. Install Windows features. Name is AD Domain Services. Restart. Actually, I'm going to erase that and hit enter a few times so you can see the command. I screwed up on that command. I'll show you where in a moment, as soon as it's done. Okay, I forgot to install the Windows features. So when I go here to Tools, none of the Active Directory tools are there. So what I'm going to do is just to include management tools and rerun the command again. If you were going to manage this DC remotely, maybe you don't need the management tools, but just to be more complete, I'm going to install them. Okay, it's installed now. So if I go here, I can see I have the Active Directory tools where I didn't have those before. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to promote this to a domain controller. Install AD. I'm just going to do something else just to show you so you can see. Git hyphen. No, how can I show you this? Install AD DS. Then I'm just going to hit tab a few times. I have ADDS domain. That's to create a new domain. ADDS domain controller adds a new domain controller to an existing domain. And I have a new force. That's what we ran initially on DC1. Hit tab again and I start over in the list. So right now, I don't want to create a new domain. I want to create a new domain controller. And I'm going to put in the domain name is contoso.com. No, I need an encrypted password. Now install. domain name is contoso.com. Our recovery password is capital PWD. There's a space between that D and the value. And I want to do my credentials. This will throw up a dialog box, ask me for my password, and then generate a authentication object that it will then pass to credentials. And then a force. Guys, I'm going to talk about this delegation when I do the next domain controller. So I'm going to put this on pause while it's promoting. Okay, I got distracted for a little bit. A student needed help with the lab, so I'm back. So I want to sign into DC4. And I'm also going to sign into DC1. I'm going into sites and services on DC1. And I'm also going to do it for DC4. I can see the east site has two DCs, with DC3 being our bridgehead server and DC4 part of that site. DC4 automatically got put in that site. West is there. Now, if I look over on the other side, on the west side, if I don't see DC4 here yet, I might hold off before I did anything else. I want to make sure that the information on the east side got replicated to the west side before I continue. And I can see that DC1 and DC4 have the same information. So um, I know that the data got replicated. I can also see that DC4 will replicate with 3. And this is generated by the KCC and my sites that I've configured. I define my bridgehead server. So DC3 will replicate with DC1 and DC4. So 4 won't replicate against any DC on the west side. Only 3 will. So if I go into DC2, I can see DC2 will replicate with DC1, but it won't replicate with any DC on the other side. DC1 will replicate with 2 on its own site and 3 on the opposite site. That's all because DC1 is a bridgehead server, So we're essentially telling Active Directory that only DC1 on this site is allowed to replicate with the other side. And if I go to the east site, we're telling the east site that only DC3 is allowed to replicate with the other site. So now I'm going to sign in to DC5. Our IP address will be 172.16.0.4. My two DNS servers will be DC1 and DC2. These two DCs know about the Contoso domain. Also, while we're waiting for that to sign in, I'm going to look at the DNS on DC4. DNS is the most important network service in an Active Directory network. I can see that I have my Contoso domain replicated already, and I can see I have my reverse replicated already. So I'm going to go back to DC5. Again, our IP address is going to be 0.4. I had to wait a minute for it to catch up. The prefix is 21. The default gateway is 172.16.0.1. And the network card I'm setting is Ethernet. No force. Click yes to relax my firewall. So now I'm going to set the DNS servers up. I'm going to configure my DNS client to use DC1 and DC2 as my servers. 172.16.0.2, comma 172.16.0.3. And I'm going to set this on interface alias Ethernet. I'm going to rename the computer DC5 and reboot. I'm going to pause the video. Okay, it's rebooted, so I'm going to sign in and install Active Directory. Going to open up PowerShell. AD-domain services, include the management tools, and restart. Again, the reboot won't occur until after I promote it to a domain controller. While that's installing, I'm going to pause it again. Okay, it's done installing, so now I'm going to talk about something else. So this is our diagram of our entire forest. This whole thing is our forest. Our root domain is called contoso.com, and we created 4 domain controllers to control that one domain. The triangle represents the domain. It's not something you can touch. It's not tangible. It's like a container. That container holds users and computers. 4 of those computers are domain controllers. So basically, we only have one domain right now. We have one forest called contoso.com. That's the name of the forest and the first domain. And that domain has 4 domain controllers in it. So what we're doing now is we're going to create a new domain called child.contoso.com. It's going to be a child domain because this domain here includes the parent domain. So if the parent name is included in the new domain, then it's a child domain. So before we actually go through and promote this to a domain controller, we need to do a fix. Do you remember in the last domain I highlighted this thing about delegation? So right now is the first time we're going to be dealing with delegation. So our parent DC has a DNS server. This is on all the DCs actually. And it's going to control the name contoso.com. But I don't want any DC in the parent domain to control the child's namespace, meaning the DNS name child.contoso.com. So what I want to do is configure something called a delegation. Now we should do this automatically. So when we promote this, it should contact the parent DC or one of these parent DCs and actually do the delegation for us. But half the time it fails. So I'm going to manually do our delegation. So we're going to tell the parent DC to send any DNS request to the child DC for that namespace child.contoso.com. So our DNS, our IP address for this child domain is 172, for this child domain controller, is 172.16.0.4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and say new delegation. Again, this should happen automatically. Remember when we see those yellow warnings that says it failed to create the delegation? In those previous warnings, that was normal because we didn't control Google's DNS server. But in this case, if we're in the child DC, we do control our upstream servers, DC1, DC2, DC3, DC4. But for some reason, it doesn't work half the time. So we're just going to manually do this delegation. So we're going to say new delegation. We're going to delegate a portion of our namespace, the child.contoso.com portion, to the child DC. And if we had multiple child DCs, we would delegate to all of them. So I'm saying for this name, because normally anything that's inside of this, like dc4.contoso.com, dc3.contoso.com, basically we're going to have another subdomain in here called child.contoso.com. And under that would be records for our child domain, like the computer accounts that are inside of the child domain would be under this folder. But we don't want it to be here. We want it to be actually hosted on the child DC. So I'm going to delegate the portion of the namespace child, which is child.contoso.com. And I'm going to add the machine I want to delegate it to. So dc5.child.contoso.com, and the IP address of that machine is 172.16.0.4. We can't click the resolve button because the DC that handles that, the DNS server that handles that, isn't up and running yet. So I'm going to click OK. Don't worry if it validates. That is the right, it can't validate yet because the DC is not up and running. The DNS server is not up and running. So we're going to send that portion of the namespace, child.contoso.com, to this machine. And then this machine will be a DNS server that can resolve any name under child.contoso.com. Then finish. So it should be gray. There's not really much you can do with it because we're going to do everything under the child. So the child will point to the parent for name resolution. So it's going to be able to handle any requests for contoso.com and then forward out any requests for Google or any other public namespace out to an outside server. So if this machine wants to resolve a name in child.contoso.com, it's going to send the request to the parent. The parent's going to see the delegation there and send it back to the child. So the child will point to the parent. The parent for contoso.com will handle the request. For google.com, it will send it out to a public DNS server. And for child.contoso.com, it'll send it back to the child. So now we're ready to promote this. So I'm going to do install ADDS. Now we have the choice of doing domain, which is to create a new domain. That's what we're doing right now. Or domain controller. So basically, if I was in this domain and I was on DC2, I'd be doing a new domain controller because the Contoso domain already exists. Or forest. If I didn't have any of this yet, I would do a new forest. But right now, we're going to create a new domain, and this will be the first domain controller in that domain. We're not creating a forest because our forest is already created. We're not adding a second domain controller because this domain doesn't exist yet. So we're going to do a new domain. The parent domain name is contoso.com. The domain type is child. Because this domain includes the parent domain, it's a child domain. If it didn't include the parent domain, it would be it's still a child domain, but it's a new tree. So the domain type would be tree. So that's what we'll do for a datum. But for right now, it's a child domain. The new domain name is child. And I want to explain something else. If I go into Active Directory users and computers on any of my parent DCs, and I expand Contoso, expand users, I have groups in this domain that I won't have in any other domain. So I have groups in this domain that I'm not going to have in this domain or this domain. And there's two groups, the enterprise admin and the schema admin. I'm going to talk only about the enterprise admins. So this first account the administrator account in my root domain. The administrator account in this domain, the domain admin account, is also in the enterprise admins group. So not only is the administrator account here a domain admin, but that user account is also an enterprise admin. And so if you sign in with that account anywhere in the forest, if you sign in with contoso.com down here or up here, you would be considered an enterprise admin. And that account can make changes to any object in the forest. So if I created a new domain down here and I had an administrator account called child/administrator, that account can only make changes here. If I had an account here called a datum/administrator, that account can only make changes here. But Contoso/administrators can make changes anywhere. So you have a domain admin, another domain admin that's also an enterprise admin. So this account, that enterprise admin account, is needed to create new domains. Only that enterprise admin account can create new domains. This domain admin account can only make changes to this domain. This admin account can only make changes to this domain. But this enterprise admin account that's also a domain admin can make changes anywhere in the forest, including creating new domains. So I'm going to supply the enterprise admin credentials. So I'm going to hit, see, it says create delegation. Even if you choose that switch, it doesn't work 50% of the time. So I'm going to supply the enterprise admin credentials. I'm going to put in my recovery password. Did I not set it? I didn't set it, guys. Give me 1 second. And then force. I'm just going to copy that. I'm just going to hit enter, then cancel. It's going to fail because I didn't supply the credentials. Okay, so I'm going to do $PWD. So I set my password. The reason why I hit enter to here, because I didn't want to have to retype all this. So I'm going to hit the up arrow, then hit enter. So I supplied the parent domain, which was contoso.com. I said it's a domain type is child. It's a child domain. The new domain name is child. I don't put child.contoso.com. It automatically knows to append it to this name because, again, it's a child domain. I supplied my enterprise admin credentials because I'm creating a new domain. I put in my recovery password for this DC, and I'm saying force. So this is going to take a while. And when we're done, we should have a new domain with a new domain in it, a new domain controller in it, and this domain controller should also be a DNS server that handles its own namespace. So I'm going to pause the video and come back to this once everything's promoted. Okay, the DC is up, so now I am going to sign in. I'm also going to sign into DC3. And DC4. So on DC4, I'm going to go into Sites and Services. So far, DC4 knows about DC5, but that's all it knows about. So DC5 isn't fully replicated over to the east site. So we have to give it time. Let's see if DC3 knows about it. So that information is going to get replicated over to DC1. DC1 will replicate it over to DC3. Then eventually DC3 will replicate it over to DC4. So before I promote additional domain controllers, I'm going to let this fully replicate. If you notice, I've been pausing this video several times. And again, DC3 doesn't even know what domain that domain controller is in yet. So we got to wait till all that information gets replicated over to the east side before we move on. But let's go to DC1. Let's see if DC1 what DC1 knows about DC5 yet. So far this video is taking me like 3 hours to make. I'm going to go to Sites and Services. Now DC5 does know what domain that DC's in. So we got to wait for that to replicate over to 3 and 3 to replicate it to 4. Once 4 knows about it, we'll be fully converged. Converged means all DCs know about all other DCs. So let's look at DC 5. DC5 knows about all DCs. DC5 is going to replicate with DC1 and 2. I'm going to go to the parent DC, DC1. DC1 knows who DC5 is going to replicate to. And still DC3 doesn't know anything. It might be 15-20 minutes before this information is populated. So let's go and look at the DNS server. I know about child.contoso.com. I control that. I will forward, if I don't know an answer, I'm going to forward that over to DC1 or 2. So if someone sends me a request for contoso.com or for google.com, I'm just going to forward that request over to DC1 or 2. If I forward this directly to Google, then I won't be able to resolve names for Contoso because only DC1 and 2 know about Contoso, plus they know who to forward to for any public namespaces. So it's like a chain of DNS. I know about child.contoso.com. These two know about Contoso. So I'm going to send requests to them. If they can't handle that name resolution, let's say for google.com, they'll send it out to an upstream server. Do I have a reverse? Yes, I copied the reverse over from DC1 and DC2 because we created one reverse domain for all of for the entire forest, for that one big subnet. Let's look at our map again. So this site has two domains in it so far, this domain and this domain. So if you apply a group policy to this site, it's going to affect 2 domains so far. This site only has 1 domain, Contoso. So this domain Contoso is in 2 different sites. This site holds 2 different domains. A site is just another container that we can apply a group policy to. So let's look at our map one more time. So now let's promote this DC6, 172.16.0.5. So I'm going to go over to tree DC6 and sign in. Again, our IP is 172.16.0.6. Actually, I'm going to do this one graphically so I can show you the wizard for the domain controller graphically. The parent domain for this tree domain is going to be Contoso. So I'm going to point it to one of these 2 servers. So if someone sends a request to this DNS server for child.contoso.com, it will forward those requests to one of these 2 machines. One of these 2 machines will then forward that request to child. If someone sent a request for google.com, it will send it to these 2 DNS servers, one of these 2 DNS servers, and one of these 2 DNS servers will send it out to a public DNS server. If someone sends a request to this DC for adatum.com, that's going to be our new tree domain. It will be able to handle that name resolution by itself. I didn't hit yes, but it's all right. I'm going to change the name and reboot. So now while that's rebooting, I'm going to go back to DC1. I'm going to go into DNS. Because adatum doesn't include the parent domain, it's not adatum.condoso.com, it's just adatum.com, I can't do a delegation because I'm not delegating a portion of Contoso's namespace. It's going to be a brand new namespace called adatum.com. So normally if someone sends me a request for a namespace I don't recognize, I would send it out to a public DNS server. But what I want to do is I want to do a conditional forwarder. I can't do look what it did. It broke my delegation. See, I need to fix this. Remember how it was gray before and it had the DNS server for the child domain? It broke it. So I'm going to delete this. And do a new delegation. for child. Child.contoso.com. It's going to be DC5.child.contoso.com. The IP address is 0.5. See, that's what I was saying. It broke it. It was trying to handle the child namespace by itself. It was a folder that I could add records to. I don't want that. I want all the records to be on the child DC itself, not in the parent DC. So going back to what I was saying is, if someone sends a request for datum.com to this DC for any names that it doesn't know, it's going to send out to Google's DNS servers. I can't delegate because it's not going to have contoso.com in the name. It's not like a datum.contoso.com. It's just a datum.com. So what I'm going to do is do something called a conditional forwarder. For any names that I don't know, I'm going to send out to my regular forwarders, unless it's a datum. So I'm going to do this conditional forwarder for a datum.com. A datum is a fake name that Microsoft uses for tree domains. And the IP is 172.16.0.6. And I'm going to send this to all DCs in the forest. Then click OK. So you need to do that conditional forwarder before promoting this DC. So now I'm ready to promote this last DC. I'm going to sign in and install the software. Gotta wait till the blue line stops. Add roles and features. Active Directory domain services and the tools to manage it. And just walk through the wizard. Restart after it's promoted. Install. I'm going to pause the video while this is going. So while it's installing, this is one tree because this child domain includes the parent domain, and this is the beginning of a second tree. This tree, there's no child domains under it, but because it has a non-contiguous namespace, meaning it doesn't include the parent domain, that's a new tree. So for child domains in an existing tree, you want to create the delegation. For child domains in a new tree, this is the beginning of a new tree, you want to do a conditional forwarder. So now this is ready to be promoted. We're going to create a new domain in an existing forest, and it's going to ask what type of domain. If it's a child domain, it's going to ask for the parent domain and the new child domain. But we're going to do a new tree domain. So it's going to ask what forest is it part of. It's part of Contoso. And the new domain is a datum, and we have to supply the enterprise admin credentials to create new domains. Click OK. Click Next. And just making sure that the domain doesn't exist or that domain name is in use. While we're waiting, I'm going to check DC3, see if it knows about DC5 yet. I'm going to highlight sites, then hit refresh. So now DC3 is aware that it's part of the child domain, and DC3 is also aware who it replicates against. I'm going to go back to the tree domain. Going to put in my recovery password. This password is only used on this domain controller if Active Directory doesn't start up. Don't need to do the delegation, doesn't work anyways. Now I'm just going to walk through the wizard, and when install is highlighted, I'm going to install it. Now I'm going to click install. While it's installing, I'm going to pause the video. Okay, this DC is promoted. I'm going to sign in as the administrator account for Datum. Going to look at DNS. And sites and services. I can see all 4 DCs showing up here. So for forwarders, I'm going to send it to DC 1 or 2. And the datum looks good here. We don't have the reverse yet. We'll get that here in a little bit. It's not fully replicated. I'm on DC 1 now. I'm going to look at the reverse zone, go properties, and I can see that that's going to get replicated to all DNS servers in this forest. So I just need to give it a little bit of time to get to DC 6. So, but I'm going to end this video here. But what I'm going to do is leave this set for a half hour before I shut down all my servers. And that's it for this next video. I think the next lab is users and groups, a really important lab, and I will see you in that video. Thank you.